Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for this EID traceability webinar. Just a few housekeeping things to start with. Brian Whaley, I serve as the CEO for the Iowa Cattlemen's Association, and so I'm happy to kind of facilitate and moderate this conversation today on this EID topic. A couple housekeeping items, as I said, just for the ease of trying to monitor and facilitate the conversation. Everybody's going to be on mute throughout the webinar. That just keeps some of the outside noise and distractions down. If you do have a question, please enter it in the chat to the host that's titled Iowa Cattlemen's Association. Those will come directly here. I have our events coordinator, Morgan Pothoven, is here as well. And she's going to be tracking that chat box. And then when we get through the presentations, we'll have time to answer those questions. We did have a few that were pre-submitted as well as some that are on the slides of our presenters. And then, so we'll do our best to get to all of the questions that we can. There will be emails available at the end of the presentation for those if you have additional questions. We're going to try to keep the questions pretty general. I know there's a lot of specific scenarios that are of interest to a lot of different people. So we want to make sure that we're trying to keep it general, but yet try to get to some basic details of what this new rule, which looks like it's going to go into effect in November, is going to require for us. This will be recorded, and if you are an ICA member, it'll be available later for viewing as well. Just real quickly, I just want to give, for those of you that are on and are not maybe as familiar with our association, I do want to do just a real quick overview for you, and I won't take much time, I promise. But the Iowa Cattlemen's Association our mission is really to grow Iowa's beef cattle business through advocacy, leadership, and education. And obviously, two components of that are going to be incorporated into today's webinar, and which is why we're doing it. We have advocated on behalf of our Cattlemen's Association, our producer members, and our industry and representatives, and taken their policy forward. And so we have advocated federally as well as in talking with all of our congressional leaders as we've worked through this process as well. And then obviously now that we're in the place that we're at and the rule looks like it's going to be in effect, now it's our role, I feel, as an association to help educate our members and all of our producers across the state as best we can, so you are in compliance as well. So on the advocacy piece, we are a member-driven association. Some people talk about the grassroots policy. So anytime we're doing an event or activity or I'm in a conversation, we're always looking at what are those things that our members have to say. We want to be very member-driven and let things come from the grassroots level, those that are actually working in the industry. And then we are obviously focused on how do we help our producers be profitable and productive within their operations. And we do have a strategic policy development process that we can share with you if you're interested as well. But it is a little extensive. We do have committees that meet and offer up ideas and policy. We monitor all sorts of things that are happening, both on the local, the regional, the state, and the federal level, and try to help advocate on our members' behalf. You know, some recent wins that you probably heard about real quick, the livestock capital gains bill that was very successful of moving that forward. this past legislative session, our meat integrity bill, or what some people had heard about, a truth in labeling bill, with all of the lab grown protein that is now becoming available, making sure that that's labeled as such. And then helping with one of the initiatives of our governor was the foreign ownership of ag land. So very active this last legislative session, and we're very involved, and thought we had a very successful session. These are just some of the activities that we have in addition. Obviously, the one that everybody we just got done with, and very successful, our Governor's Steer Show. We do have an Iowa Cattlemen's Leadership Program. We just got back about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago with a small group that we were out in D.C. And obviously, traceability was one of the topics that we covered with our congressional leaders. We work with Iowa Beef Industry Council on the Best Burger Contest. We do hold the Carcass Challenge event as well, and then our annual bull test and sale is their symbol of excellence. So one of the things that we're beyond our advocacy piece, I think it's important that we try to help keep our members up to date with what's going on. So whether that's through producer forums, we do hold some producer meetings with NCBA as they come out across the country. But more specific to Iowa, our Iowa Cattlemen's Industry Convention, which will be December 12th through 13th, and actually going to be a new location. We'll be here in Ames at the Gateway Center. I encourage you to take a look at that. Information will be coming out for that. And then our hope as we move forward with some things is to potentially do some more webinars. I know years ago they did some interviews or some YouTube things, but I think it's important for our members to be able to stay up to date and be able to communicate, and then for us to also educate on where we are at from an association standpoint, especially when we're getting into legislative sessions. And then producer outreach. How do we best serve our members? And how do we best serve the industry across the state for its long-term sustainability for our producers and our members? Okay, one of the things I thought would be important as we jump in today to the conversation about the traceability rule that's come up. Specifically, people are referring it to the new EID rule that goes into effect in November, as I mentioned. I wanted to take a minute and just share with you a short little section out of our ICA's legislative policy statement handbook that we operate by. These are policies that are set from our grassroots level, work up through our process, are approved at our annual meeting, and this is how we operate. Whether it's at the state level or whether it's at the federal level, these are the things that we take forward for our members. There's a lot of preamble to the whereas statements that go into this policy statement, but I thought it'd be good just real quickly so you have knowledge of what is ICA's policy statement as it relates to this traceability topic in EID. It states there, therefore be it resolved, an effective animal disease traceability program should, and there's a lot of criteria here. Obviously, we want it compatible with a private sector animal ID or verification programs. It needs to be some general traceability principles that are based off of the Organization of Animal Health. Then recognize existing USDA programs for beef exports. That's a big topic as we get into foreign animal disease preparedness and then leading into vaccines, but that's another step down the road. And then be built using infrastructure supports other potential uses for identification. It has to be low. If there is going to be one, it's a low-cost electronic official tagging device that needs to be paid for by the federal and or state funds when possible. We'll talk about that at the end a little bit, as well as how they can be acquired. And then require cattle ID information kept confidential and strongly protected from disclosure. So 5 and 6 were ones that, if you listen to some of the things that have been out, and specifically, most recently, I've been on a couple radio shows here in Iowa. Those are two big ones that I have made sure that people understand that obviously our stance is that it needs to be paid for, and the importance of keeping the information confidential and protected from disclosure. As well as then protect ownership information from disclosure of future owners as well. Protect producer from liability after that cattle have left the producer's control. Operate at the speed of commerce. I think that's an important thing that we have to have in place. Has to move quickly as things happen on a regular basis within our industry. And then not replace or impede existing state brand inspection activities. And then it has to work within a framework to accommodate all classes of cattle. You're going to see some references today to some things that's the rule applies to dairy cattle as well as beef cattle, and some of the interpretations that have been made with that. And so it has to work within that entire framework of the bovine industry. Okay, so we're going to jump right in today, and I want to take just a minute here to introduce a couple speakers today. Dr. Kevin Petersburg is our area veterinarian in charge in the Iowa United States Department of Agriculture and the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. And so he's going to do the majority of the presentation. We originally had planned to have Dr. Jeff Kaizen on as well, who's our state veterinarian. And Dr. Kaizen has done some of these presentations in partnership with Dr. Petersburg as well. We did one for Livestock Marketing Association here in Iowa. But unfortunately, things happen, and Dr. Kaizen's been called away and will not be able to be on today. However, we're fortunate to have Dr. Katie Rumsey with us, who will represent the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship in their perspective, and be able to hopefully help us answer some questions. But I do anticipate Dr. Petersburg will probably carry most of the initial slides and informational piece, and then we will open it up for a conversation and questions through the chat, and then I will facilitate and monitor that as we go through. So, Dr. Petersburg, I appreciate both you and Dr. Rumsey being on today to discuss with us and share information related to this important topic as it's going to impact our cattle industry. So I will now turn it over to you, and you can go ahead and start your presentation. I would remind individuals, please mute your volume so you can't speak, so it keeps the sound down in the background so everybody can hear. And then cameras also will help. We do have a large number of people on, so that might help a little bit with bandwidth as well. So, Dr. Petersburg, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, thanks a lot. Can you hear me all right?
Perfect, thank you.
Unfortunately, we're having some connectivity issues with USDA today, so I won't be able to show you video of myself, but I think that's beside the point. I think you're here to learn about ADT and the EID rules, so you don't need to see my picture. So the new rule for EID will be taking effect November the 5th. And I want to just emphasize 2 points before I even get into the main part of the presentation. And I'll probably reiterate these at the end as well. Official ID ear tags placed prior to November the 5th remain official for the life of the animal. There's no requirement to place an EID tag in these cattle. So if your cattle are already identified with one of the noose tags, the bright tags they call them, that has the U.S. shield stamped on it, It is an official form of ID, and as long as it's placed prior to November 5th, that is good for the life of the animal. The second point is the requirement for an EID tag applies to newly tagged cattle as of November 5th that will move interstate. So if your cattle are remaining in the state of Iowa, they're not moving out of state, then that EID requirement would not apply to them. So next I'm going to just start into the presentation and give you a little summary of some of the changes. Morgan, if you can just back up one slide, please. Okay, so like I said, as of November 5th, those classes of cattle and bison that require official ID will require an ear tag that's both visually and electronically readable. But the classes of cattle that require official ID when moved interstate have not changed. So those classes of cattle you're probably well aware of include sexually intact cattle and bison 18 months of age or over, all dairy cattle of any age, cattle and bison of any age used for rodeo or recreational events, and cattle and bison of any age used for shows or exhibitions. And there are a few exceptions to those, and we'll cover those later in the presentation. So those have not changed. Those categories that require official ID stay the same after November the 5th. Next slide, please. The new definition of dairy emphasizes that dairy cross calves are, for the purpose of this new rule, are considered dairy. And that hasn't changed. It's just emphasized in this new rule. So it's very clear that dairy cross calves do require official ID. And then next, veterinarians that place ear tags in cattle must keep records in a manner that enables them to report the traceability information to the state veterinarian or the AVIC within 48 hours of a request. And the noose tags or bright tags that might already be out there in inventory can still be used in swine and captive cervids after November 5th. They just can't be used in cattle and bison as official ID after November 5th if they are being placed in cattle that were not already identified with those tags. And they can also just be disposed of. Hopefully not put out there on one of the auction services. They'll hopefully just be disposed of in a manner where they would not be misused. And then I should mention dairy steers. In the past, dairy steers needed official ID, but the ID did not need to be recorded on the interstate movement document. As of November 5th, the ID for those dairy steers will also need to be recorded on their interstate movement document. Next slide, please. So, what cattle and bison are subject to the official ID requirements? We just summarized that previously. All sexually intact cattle and bison 18 months of age or older, all dairy cattle, any age, whether they're sexually intact or not. Cattle and bison of any age used for rodeo or recreational events, and cattle and bison of any age used for shows or exhibitions. Next slide. The regulated cattle and bison, that is those that require official ID for interstate movement, would require it unless one of these exemptions applies. And there'll be several of them here. So one would be if those cattle were moved as a commuter herd, and that's usually applicable in those states where cattle are moved to another state for grazing, and then they come back to the home farm or the home ranch. And in that case, if the state of origin and the commuter state agree, they can move back and forth on a commuter herd agreement. And then another option is that cattle and bison could be moved directly from a location in one state through another state back to a second location in the original state. In that case, they would not need official ID. Next slide. Another example is if the cattle and bison are moved interstate directly to an approved tagging site, and that could be oftentimes an approved livestock market. For example, in Iowa, all of our approved livestock markets are also approved tagging sites. In that case, if they're moved to an approved tagging site and they get official ID put in them before they get commingled with other livestock, then that is another example where they could be moved interstate without having official ID at the time they're crossing the state line. Next slide, please. Another example would be cattle and bison that are moved between two states, and the state of origin and state of destination state veterinarians have agreed upon another form of identification, such as breed registry tattoo or brand that's registered. In those cases, the animals would have to be moved with their accompanying registration paper. That exemption depends on the origin state and destination state agreeing that they'll accept that as official ID in lieu of a metal ear tag currently or an EID tag after November 5th. Next slide, please. Cattle and bison can also be moved interstate without official ID if they're moved directly to a slaughtering establishment or directly to no more than one approved livestock facility and then directly to a recognized slaughtering establishment. And there they have to be harvested within 3 days of arrival. And the next slide will tell you that they can be moved interstate with just a back tag, and that back tag can be applied either at the market before they move interstate, or it can be applied at the slaughter plant. And they can be moved on an owner shipper statement in that situation. Next slide, please. So the ADT rule, like we've said, will take effect November 5th. If you really want to read all the comments and responses, you can go to that regulations.gov website and search for electronic ID cattle, and you can see the new rule with all those comments. Next slide, please. So again, we want to emphasize this rule only affects the type of ear tag that's considered official. It does not affect the classes of cattle requiring ID. The same cattle that were previously required to be officially identified will continue to require official ID under the new rule. No new classes of cattle are going to require official ID. Next slide. So beginning November 5th, official ear tags that are sold for or that are applied to cattle and bison must be readable both visually and electronically. And like I said at the beginning, official ID that was placed prior to November 5th is good for the life of the animal. They don't need a EID tag placed in them. Next slide, please. This is what electronic ID might look like. Usually there's a button and a bangle tag. you'll see that it starts out with the digits 840. That's the country code for United States. And then you'll see it's followed by 003. Currently, all the tags that are out there will start with those first 6 digits, 840003. Some years in the future, we'll exhaust all the combinations of tag numbers that follow that, and then we'll roll over to 840004. But right now, they're all 840003, and only the last 9 digits are unique. Next slide, please. So where can you get your EID tags? Well, you can purchase them from a tag manufacturer at market cost, or USDA provides EID tags to the states free of charge, and it's a limited supply, but they are currently in the state inventory, and they issue those to accredited veterinarians. Dr. Rumsey, would you like to comment at this point how people would go about asking their veterinarian to get those tags for them from the state?
Certainly, yeah. You, as producers, can ask your veterinarians to request the free tags from IDOLS, either by giving us a call or going to our website. I'll put that in the chat so everybody can see it. But there's some information on IDOLS' website for that. And then there is a request for veterinary supply form. It's been updated to have these EID tags on it. And so veterinarians can just simply fill out that form, mail it in with payment. Unfortunately, right now, we don't have any way of accepting electronic payment, so we still have to use the old-fashioned postal service to send that in. And then we'll get those processed and get those tags sent out. So I will put that website here in the chat.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Rumsey. Next slide, please. So you're not allowed to remove or replace official ear tags unless one of these criteria would be true. If there was a problem with deterioration of the tag, infection around the tag, a malfunction of that ear tag, or it's incompatible with your system of reading electronic tags. In that case, you would apply to the state or federal official in your state and ask them if you could replace that tag. And then if they give permission, then next slide will explain what you need to do. Okay.
Hey, Dr. Petersburg, I misspoke. I said to send in a check because I was thinking of regular tags, but these tags are free. So I wanted to make sure that I clarified that. Producers will need to have a premise ID number, though, when those tags are requested. But again, sorry about that. The tags are free.
Okay. And we should reiterate that, there is a supply of them right now. We can't guarantee that we'll have a free supply in future years, but that is USDA's intent, is to try to get funding to be able to provide those again in FY25. We just don't know yet. So, like I said, you can get permission from state and federal officials to replace tags, and if you do, then we want you to replace the tag with a new official EID tag after November 5th and record the date and location, plus who replaced the tag, record the old tag number if it's known, and the new EID number. And then you have to keep those records for 5 years. Next slide. You can apply a second ear tag to an animal that's already officially identified with one or more non-EID official ear tags, such as a brucellosis vaccination ear tag or one of those noose tags, bright tags. If you choose to have a second tag, you can put in an EID tag as a second tag. Next slide. Again, official ID tags placed prior to November 5th are going to be good for the life of the animal. We want to keep reiterating that. Next slide, please. And as I said, you can determine if those tags that are in the ears of the animals are official by looking for that US shield you see in the upper left-hand corner of this slide. That'll be stamped on the tag if it is official. Next slide. These are tags you're commonly accustomed to using, and you've seen them many times, I'm sure. You got the news tag or bright tag on the top there, and you've got the orange calf foot vaccination tag on the bottom. So like I've said, those, if they're placed prior to November 5th, are official for the life of the animal. Next slide, please. Now we'll go through a few scenarios involving interstate movement of cattle and bison, and then that might generate some questions, but we'll go ahead and just jump right into those. Next slide, please. So if you had beef steers, spayed heifers, moved interstate out of an approved market, they're going to require an ICVI, which is an Interstate Certificate of Veterinary Inspection, but no official ID would be required for those beef steers or spayed heifers. Next slide. If you have sexually intact beef cattle over 18 months of age that are moved interstate, coming into an approved market, if that market is an approved tagging site, then the cattle could be officially identified at the market rather than prior to moving interstate. And like I said, all approved markets in Iowa have been approved as tagging sites. So that would be true for moving cattle into a market in Iowa from out of state. And the owner shipper statement or an ICVI would meet the documentation requirements for those cattle. Next slide, please. If you have sexually intact beef cattle and they're over 18 months of age and they're moving interstate out of an approved market, going other than to slaughter, they would require official ID and the ICVI. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Dairy cattle moved interstate to an approved market. If the market is an approved tagging site, those dairy cattle could be officially identified at the market. Otherwise, they need to be officially identified prior to crossing the state lines. The owner shipper statement or an ICVI would meet the documentation required. Next slide, please. Beef feeder cattle or calves less than 18 months of age moved interstate out of an approved market. No ICVI is required, and no official ID is required, but the ICVI is required. Okay, next slide, please. Dairy cattle moved interstate out of an approved market directly to slaughter. They could move on an owner shipper statement, and back tags would suffice for identification if the animals will be slaughtered within 3 days of arrival at the slaughtering establishment. And those back tags do not need to be recorded on the owner shipper statement. Next slide, please. The new rule clarifies the definition of dairy cattle. It really doesn't change it, it just clarifies it to emphasize that the dairy beef cross calves are considered dairy cattle for the purpose of requiring official identification after November 5th. Next slide, please. Another example, beef steers and spayed heifers moved interstate to an approved market can move on an owner shipper statement or an ICVI, and no official ID is required. Next slide. So who's responsible for the documentation that accompanies those cattle and bison that are moving interstate? Well, basically it's everybody in the chain that caused those animals to move interstate. So for example, it could include the livestock market, a shipper, a hauler, a broker, a veterinarian, and the person that received the cattle. Next slide. The two forms of movement documents most commonly used are the ICVI, Interstate Certificate of Veterinary Inspection, which requires the species, number of animals, purpose of movement, the 911 address where they were loaded, and the destination. We don't want PO boxes because we want to be able to trace back to that physical premises where those cattle came from. And official ID, unless the species-specific requirement provides for an exemption. Next slide, please. The second document is the owner shipper statement. It's a statement signed by the owner or shipper of the livestock that are moving interstate, and it'll state the location from which the animals are moved interstate, the destination of the animals, number of animals, the species, and the owner at the time of movement, and the name and address of the shipper, and the identification of each animal as required by the regulations, unless the regulations specifically provide that identification does not have to be recorded for that class of animal. Next slide. The ICVIs that are written by the accredited veterinarians do have to be maintained, a copy of those maintained for 5 years. The veterinarian also has to forward a copy to the state veterinarian in the state of origin within 7 days of issuing that ICVI. Next slide. All right. I think we're going to open it up for questions here.
Okay, thank you. And I've got a few questions that have come in already. And I don't know, a couple of these we may be able to knock off, and you may want me to tackle Dr. Petersburg and Dr. Rumsey as well as we go through here, depending upon the topic. But we are getting some questions about the tags and the distribution of tags. So my understanding was that, these tags, my understanding is these tags have been available since 2020, and each state is allotted so many on an annual basis. And in talking to Dr. Kaizen previously, I know that Iowa has pretty much taken their allotment that they've been given. And now with this new rule, and then being limited, and then there's a requirement, there's $15 million that has to be spent to implement this rule. I guess the question is, will the state have enough to cover all of the cattle that are intended in this rule, meaning everything that needs to have it that's going to potentially be interstate movement that's over 18 months of age? So that'd be the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question that we're getting is, are those tags also free for any bovine use, not necessarily dairy, but potentially in the dairy beef cross calves that we mentioned earlier at the beginning? And I don't know who wants to take that question. I know it's two parts, and I can rephrase it again if I need to.
Yeah, I think we'll probably have to share our response to those questions. So the tags can be used in those dairy cross calves. They're not limited to just cattle that are over 18 months of age. They're available for any animal that is required by the new rule to have official ID. And so, we went through those classes of cattle, and current, as of November 5th, all dairy cattle, regardless of their age and regardless of whether they're sexually intact or not, will all require official ID. So if they're moving interstate, that's when that kicks in. Then they require official ID. And the other category, of course, is the animals over 18 months of age that are going to be required to have official ID. So those sexually intact animals over 18 months of age, even if they're beef cattle, they require official ID moving interstate. The quantity of tags available is dependent on the funding we get from Congress each year, so I can't really predict how many would be available. All I can tell you is I probably should refer this over to Dr. Rumsey if you want to get an idea of the quantity that may be on hand now, and how to go about getting those.
So let me clarify one thing first, too, that if we have cattle that are just staying within the state of Iowa, remember that this doesn't apply to them to have an EID tag. So that's just something to remember and keep in mind. I think sometimes we maybe forget about that, but this only applies to cattle that are moving between those states. Like Dr. Petersburg said, that this does rely on funding from the federal government. We plan on ordering our allotment. We have been doing that for the past several years. And so we will continue to do that and get tags as we can. We've got the ability to store some of those tags. I don't have the number of tags right offhand. I did just ask Megan to get that for me of what we have. But I do know we've got a fair amount available right now and for everybody. So again, if you just go to IDOL's website for the veterinarians and submit that form, then you'll be able to order those tags, and we could get those processed pretty quickly once we get the form.
Yeah.
As soon as I get the number from Megan, I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, I think probably the question is more just geared towards, do we have enough to hit this initial phase, as it starts thinking about things occurring, especially as we get into next spring with the movement of bulls and different things that happen and getting prepared for that. So the one thing that I want to just kind of make mention to that Dr. Petersburg talked about is he mentioned funding. And I know that if you follow politics these days, that with the continuing resolution, and I did reach out and ask, depending upon what happens with moving forward with funding government and the stopgap measure that's there right now, I did get confirmation that APHIS will still have the authority to make EID tag purchases come the new fiscal year. So we hope that will continue, that they will continue to be able to fund that allotment as needed as well. Okay, another question. We had Dr. Petersburg, you previously mentioned about Iowa. All of the livestock markets in Iowa are official tagging sites. Number one, is that correct? And number two, how do you go about finding where those are located? do you have that on a website somewhere, either in IDLES or?
Okay. Right. I checked with our animal identification coordinator for Iowa, and she told me that all of the approved livestock markets were also approved as official tagging sites. To get a list of those, I'll have to check with my animal ID coordinator and see if we can point you to a website, and then I'll share that with you, Brian, when we're done here, and you can share it with your membership.
Dr. Petersburg, I can put it actually in the chat. There's a dashboard.
Yeah.
For that.
Great.
But yeah, we do make sure we want all of our markets to be approved tagging sites. So if we have a new market that's coming on board, we make sure that they're an approved tagging site.
Very good. Thank you very much. So one of the questions is, and obviously, as we think about this in terms of compliance, one of the things that would like to talk a little bit about, Dr. Petersburg, is the enforcement side and what happens if you aren't in compliance as you move forward in that.
Okay. We initially intend to educate people that this is a new requirement. So we're not going to be heavy-handed about originally trying to penalize people that have their first violation of this rule. And typically what we do on the first time that we find someone has violated our interstate movement regulations unintentionally, we'll typically issue either a letter of information or a letter of warning. So they might get this warning notice from our investigative and enforcement staff. And it just basically says, you know, you moved cattle interstate in violation of 9 CFR Part 86. This is the requirement. We lay it out for them, and then, you know, say, you know, if this would occur in the future, you know, you could be subject to a civil penalty. So that's typically how it works.
Okay, thank you. Another question that came in, and I know that this was mentioned, but I think this is just more for clarification as we were talking about the rule. But beef feeder heifers under 18 months of age are exempt from the EID, but they still need a CVI. Is that correct?
Right. If they're moved interstate, you know, then they're going to require ICVI to accompany them, but they don't need official ID in their ears.
Right. Okay. And I'm going to try to put this one kind of, I'll hopefully get all of the information that came in with this question. I'll do a short one first. Is the OSS a different form than the interstate CVI? Meaning, can the interstate CVI be used as the OSS?
Yeah, the interstate CVI, the Certificate of Veterinary Inspection, that can always be the official document accompanying the animals interstate. That's fine. That form is issued by an accredited veterinarian. So, you know, there may be a fee involved in getting your ICVI. Whereas an owner shipper statement is issued and signed by the shipper who's moving those animals interstate. In that case, they are not requesting the services of an accredited veterinarian to issue that document. So, of course, there wouldn't be the fee. that's really the significant difference between the two. One other difference, I guess, is that the ICVI, if official ID is required on the animals, it would typically have to be one of those forms that we mentioned, the EID tag after November 5th, or, you know, if the two states, the shipping.
I think maybe we lost Dr. Petersburg there in the middle of that response. Hopefully we can get him back up on the call here. Dr. Rumsey, maybe while we're seeing if we could get that done, can you talk about the types of tags? I know there's some confusion about high frequency versus low frequency. Can you describe what that tag is? Which one is the one that's in the rule, I guess?
I'm actually going to have to default to Dr. Petersburg on talking about that. That is not something I can do off the top of my head. And I apologize. Dr. Kaizian asked me to join this webinar about 15 minutes before it started. So if we can't get Dr. Petersburg back, which it looks like maybe he rejoined. Are you back, Dr. Petersburg?
I think I'm back. Sorry.
Oh,
I don't know what happened.
Yeah, there was a question about high frequency versus low frequency, and I was defaulting back to you on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Petersburg, the question was really about, you know, we talked about the tags itself, and they're an electronic. So the question is it low or is it high that's going to be used? And then what information is that gathering, I guess, is the question.
Okay. So both forms are legal and official. They have to be approved. Each tag that a manufacturer wants to put out there has to be approved by APHIS. But they have approved both low frequency tags and ultra high frequency tags. The tags that are in inventory provided free of charge by APHIS are currently all the low frequency tags. So a producer would have to contact a manufacturer and purchase the ultra high frequency tag if they wanted to use that. What was the second part of the question?
No, I think that's, you know, the one thing that we've gotten from some of our members is obviously what's that data going to collect? And if it's a low frequency, obviously, you know, how far away is it going to reach? You know, as you think about the reader capability of that, and that's just one question, that these are low frequency tags and not necessarily high, but either one, correct me if I'm wrong, because we attended both the same meeting where we learned a little bit about this. That's still the capability of what they're using is not going to be able to be picked up from, I don't know, as an example, some type of satellite, I guess, for lack of a better example. Correct?
That's correct. The low frequency tag, you have to have your reader within probably 12 inches of the animal of that tag to be able to read it. It has to be pretty close. The high frequency tag can be read, you know, outside of the pen, you know, you can, or outside of a trailer, you can read the tags. But in both situations, those tags themselves don't have any sort of, you know, battery power or anything like that. They only emit a signal when they're activated by a reader. So if you've got, you know, the scanner in your hand, and you read those tags. The scanner sends a signal to the tag responds back with the 15-digit number, and that's it. So that's all the data that is emitted by the tag at this point. Is just that 15-digit number that goes back to that reader.
Right. Okay. So this gets the next question that comes in is dealing with who's required or to put these tags in, especially when they pass through a market. And I know that this is a topic that has come up when working with livestock markets as well, and in those conversations. So if an individual buys a lot of let's say bred cows at a market, and it's out of state, and they're going to be moved back into Iowa, are then they required to come back through a chute to scan the tag of that individual's before they can load them out and head home? So that's documented that transaction has occurred.
Okay, so let me try to rephrase this so I understand exactly what you're driving. So the cattle are coming into Iowa to a livestock market and being sold out of that market in Iowa to go somewhere else within the state of Iowa. Was that what I understood?
No, they're purchased out of state and needing to be transported into Iowa. At what point is that transaction occurring, and who has the responsibility to make sure that those tags get put in because they are bred cows, for example?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when they cross the state line, that's when the rule takes effect. So anybody who is responsible in that chain of people who caused the interstate movement of those cattle that required official ID can be held responsible. So it's kind of a team effort where you got the source of the animals, the person that sold the animals, you've got the trucker, you've got the maybe a broker involved, you got the person that received the animals in Iowa. They all can be named as responsible. So the person that's buying the animals in Iowa should be saying to the seller of the animals, are these animals officially identified with EID tags? Because that is a requirement when they cross the state line, and unless those cattle are going directly to an approved tagging site in Iowa, that would be an exception where they could wait and they could be tagged at that approved tagging site in Iowa. So that makes sense, or is there more questions along those lines?
So let's change it up now. What if those cattle already have EID tags in and they're coming across, but the person who purchased those cattle at that market are going to do their own transportation across the state line? Do they have to be run through a chute again and scanned to verify that transactions occurred before they can be loaded, and that individual who purchased those cattle can move them?
So if we're talking about cattle that are sexually intact and over 18 months of age, they require official ID. They require an ICVI when they cross the state line, and that official ID needs to be recorded on the ICVI. So someone at the point of loading needs to either electronically scan those tags so they can be recorded on the ICVI, or visually read those ID tags. They are required to be visually readable and basically at an arm's length, 30 inches. So
Right.
one of those two things would have to happen.
And
Okay.
if I can add to that, I think some of this goes down to the flow of animals through a market. And from the markets that I visited here in Iowa, everybody does it just a little bit differently. I think there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve and maybe a little bit of heartburn until everybody kind of gets used to this. Some of the markets have much more experience with this than others. So hopefully there's some sharing of best practices, but a lot of it is just kind of maintaining that workflow and figuring out what works best for them. These markets went through it when Scrape EID became required for sheep, and then we added on goats a couple of years ago, and so they're used to changing their processes whether they really want to or not, and complying with these rules. And so some of this will be kind of workflow and figuring out some of how that works best at that particular market. Is this a smaller market? Is this a bigger market? How many people they have? How big is the sale? And kind of figuring out that workflow.
Very good. Thank you. So this is a clarifying question that came in, and I just want to make sure that it gets answered. I think just in terminology or the conversation. But the question is, and I'm going to read it exactly, that it says, am I understanding correctly that only a licensed veterinarian can install or apply the tag on the animals? Do either one of you want to answer that?
I'll take a stab at it, and Dr. Rumsey can always correct me for the policy within Iowa. But in Iowa, the tags are issued to accredited veterinarians. An accredited veterinarian can get the status that would allow him to distribute tags to a producer, and then that producer could place the tags in the ears of the cattle. In that case, the accredited veterinarian has to do some record keeping to make it clear whose cattle are being identified with those tags. So there are two options. The veterinarian can put tags in himself, or the veterinarian can distribute tags to producers, as long as he has that status that allows him to do that and is willing to keep the extra records. You want to clarify as well, Dr. Rumsey?
So that's for the tags that IDOLS has, is that we're only providing those free tags to accredited veterinarians. They can request them for specific producers. That producer has to have a premise ID, and then those will be distributed to the veterinarian. We keep track of what numbers are distributed to the veterinarian, and then the veterinarian is also going to keep track of what is going to the producer.
The veterinarian can be a tag manager, basically, and that allows them to distribute tags to individuals.
Okay, thank you. So we know that the EID tags that you've talked about previously are the 840 tags that start with 840-003, like you mentioned. What if cattle are previously carrying a manufacturer block EID tag, for example, the Allflex EID tag that has like a 982? Do those need to be replaced, or are they grandfathered in?
If the animal is going to be moved interstate, it's going to need an official ear tag, and those 982 tags are not going to be considered official. I don't believe they have the U.S. shield on them. So again, look for that U.S. shield to verify that your tags are official.
Okay. and this, I'm going to try to simplify this question for both of you, if you will. Is USDA and or IDLES working to create some type of a standard document or carbon type paper to record the transfer of EIDs that's happening? Specifically, this question is for vet clinics.
If a veterinary clinic is transferring tags or assigning tags to a producer to put in, there is a software system. It's called the AIMS, Animal Identification Management System. They go into that system and they enter the tags that were assigned to that producer with their premise ID number. So that's the formal way of assigning tags to a producer. I don't think there is any plan for developing any paperwork like a carbon form or something for that purpose of documenting the transfer of those tags. Unless IDLES has some plan I'm not aware of, Dr. Rumsey.
No, there is no current plan for that.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to also acknowledge that, you know, we've talked about, as we talk about getting access to these EID tags, and you can get them through the form, through IDLES, through your vet office, as they've indicated. You can also, and this has come in, it's more of a statement, so I'm just going to reference it because it is accurate. You know, you can purchase EID tags from manufacturer suppliers on your own and put those tags in your cattle. And then when, you know, you need a CVI, those numbers will be what the vet uses to put on the CVI. So yes, you can get them from IDLES, and or you purchase your own as well. Okay, the next question is, how do you get a premise ID number?
That's for our IDLES to respond. I'll tell you basically that the producer works with D. Clausen at IDLES, and they have a form you fill out to apply for a premises ID number. Do you want to give more detail than that, Dr. Rumsey?
No, that's essentially it. There's a form to fill out, and again, it's on our website. Give me just a second, and I'll put, this is our ADT website, and it goes over, there's some kind of frequently asked questions on here about the premise ID, and then there's also the application as well. And like Dr. Petersburg said, D. Clausen is our point of contact. She's great to work with. She can answer any questions that you have. Basically, it's letting us know where you're at and what type of animals that you have. And it gives you a unique identification number to be able to order these tags. But I'll share that here right now in the chat so everybody can see that. But essentially, it's filling out a form and sending it in. And then about every 3 years or so, we contact you just to make sure that your information is current. The other thing I would say with these premise IDs, we do also call them PINs. So you may hear us use either Prem ID, premise ID, or PINs, because I don't know, we like to use lots of different names for the same thing. But anyway, the big thing about that is that if something changes, you no longer have a species of animal, or you move locations, something like that, give us a call, shoot us an email, let us know that your information has changed, and that way we can keep everything updated. Otherwise, we send out updates every couple of years.
So a follow-up to that is, what happens if they're needing to put in at a tagging site, and the individual that's going to assume ownership of those cattle, in this case in Iowa, livestock market is, I think, the example, Do all producers need a premise ID to have that occur?
No, they don't. So the premise ID is for ordering tags. The market, when they tag animals, they're responsible for knowing and recording where did those animals come from, what are the tags that they put in those animals, and then where did they go to? And those markets all have their own premise ID numbers.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, so and I know some of these questions we may have to get some additional answers for, and at this point, I just want to say that our plan is, as we're collecting all these questions and bringing them in, because we are getting quite a few, as we go through this, that we will continue to get these answers, and then use them to maybe do some FAQ type things in some of our newsletters or news releases and things out to help our producers as well, if we don't get through all of them. One of the questions that came in, and I think this is something that is one of a concern that's out there, but obviously the readers in the wands are an important aspect of this. What recent technology has improved in them and from years ago, and do they do age and source verification?
Well, I'll just tell you that the only thing that I'm aware of currently, that the ones that we're funding for idols to purchase, they are for scanning and reading the 15-digit ID number. I don't know that they've got other capabilities beyond that. Do you, Dr. Rumsey?
Yeah, the one readers that we have and use, I'd say that the things that have improved over the last couple of years is they can read from a little bit further away. You don't have to be right up against the tag, whereas they used to be had to be a lot closer to that. The newer readers can also read a series of tags. You can go from one animal to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, kind of a group of animals, and then you can look at all of those tags at the same time. So you don't have to scan the animal and then look at what that tag is and then go on. These the newer readers too are also compatible with either an app on your phone or on your computer, so you can directly download those tag numbers. But the only thing that they read is the tag numbers, nothing else with that.
Very good, thank you. So as we think about this, and should we also check with the state of destination for additional ID requirements for movements? What's that process look like, and do we need to do that? If we do, what's the process look like?
Well, it's always recommended that the individual who's moving animals interstate check with the state veterinarian's office at the state of destination to make sure you're in compliance with all of their entry requirements, not just animal ID, but there may be requirements for specific statements, certification statements on the paperwork. There could be testing requirements, there could be vaccination requirements, a variety of things. The states are not going to be more restrictive as far as if you have the EID tag in the ear of the animal and it's the official EID tag with the U.S. shield on it, that will be accepted by all the states. There's the possibility that some other forms of ID as alternates could be accepted by the states. Like I said, the tattoo, or maybe the brand, if it's a registered tattoo and registered brand, might be allowed if both states agreed. But there shouldn't be any states that would not accept that EID tag with the U.S. shield on it.
And I always tell people it's always a good idea to make sure that you do know the requirements of the state of destination, no matter what species of animal that you're shipping. A good example of how things can change very quickly is that with the advent of high path avian influenza in dairy cattle, a lot of states implemented requirements for lactating dairy cattle to be tested, and USDA also implemented some testing. So that's where things can change suddenly. So it's always a good idea, just double check. Most states of the destination have a website that you can go look at their requirements, but it's always good to kind of keep track of those so you know what's going on and what they require.
Okay. Talk a little bit about, you earlier mentioned I think it was an exception on a commuter herd. Talk a little bit more about what a commuter herd is, and maybe just give a description. And then, how does that, if those herds and then would commingle with another herd, how do you track those things from there for a disease traceability standpoint?
Okay. Yeah, the commuter herd is it's an agreement between two states where they will allow these animals to move from the state of origination to the other state without having official ID placed in them, and they can return to that state of origin without official ID. And as long as they have a commuter herd agreement accompanying them, they don't need additional documentation accompanying them. But this is for special circumstances. Generally, it's used for those states where animals might move from the state of origin to another state for grazing, and then at the end of the grazing period, they come back to the state of origin, to their home farm or home ranch. So it's a fairly unique situation where you can use those commuter agreements, and it's probably more common in some of the southwestern states, I would say, where it may be used, but I'm not aware of any commuter agreements that Iowa has.
Yeah, that is
but
correct, Dr. Petersburg. We don't have any at the moment.
Yeah. So if some producer had a situation where they felt that they needed that commuter agreement and felt they would qualify, they would contact Dr. Kaizen first, the state veterinarian, ask if he was willing to allow the use of a commuter herd agreement in their situation. And then ultimately, Dr. Kaizen would talk to the state of destination, where they're going for grazing, let's say, and see if they would agree to sign that commuter herd agreement.
Okay, very good. So let me ask a follow-up to that, because I think that one of the questions I know that I've gotten a lot, and it just for clarification here, is, so let's just say I'm going to use an example here, along the southern border of Iowa, you have a herd that crosses the state line within the same large tract of land or pasture, but they're going from one state to the other state, whether it's there's a gate, there's whatever. What's the EID requirement there? Since Iowa doesn't have a commuter herd agreement, and that's not exactly what that commuter herd agreement is used for. What's that requirement of that situation? Because I know that's been a question that we've gotten frequently.
Yeah, for that sort of a unique situation, I would suggest that the producer contact the state veterinarian, Dr. Kaizen, and let him visit with state veterinarian in Missouri in this example, and they would come to an agreement on how those animals could move back and forth between their states. There is the allowance for the two state veterinarians to come to an agreement on those sort of special circumstances.
Okay, I have one, and I hope I'm understanding this question correctly. So, but we do have a question about kind of the process of disease traceability. So, if we go to these tags, how does that help speed up traceability compared to now? Basically, how is the data going to be used different or faster than the way they're doing it now? And I don't know if you can answer that question specifically, but that is a question that's come in. What's the process of traceability first, and then how is it going to speed up using the EID?
Yeah. So when, say, we get a positive test result on an animal that was slaughtered, the Food Safety Inspection Service collects all the identification that's on that animal. They turn it over to the state and to APHIS to trace back where that animal came from. The plant will have some information, and then we'll also follow up by using records to see where those tags were placed. So, for example, we have an animal identification coordinator in each state, and they spend a lot of time working on these traces, and they are very familiar with the process. But they would be able to look in their records and see what veterinarian was issued those official tags, and then they can contact that veterinarian, and that veterinarian has to look in their records to then tell us whose animals were tagged with those tags. So it's kind of a manual process of searching backwards, whereas if you had these electronic ID tags in the animals and they were entered into that AIMS database by the veterinarian who issued them out to the producer, the animal ID coordinator would be able to look up that EID tag in the AIMS and know what producer it was issued to. And ultimately, when the system is fully implemented, hopefully there will be the ability for animals to be scanned as they're going through livestock markets, for example, and each of those points where that animal has been identified would be entered into a database where we can track, and then we can see, okay, it was at this facility for this period of time. It exposed certain other animals that were around that facility, that animal at the same time. And so it should expedite knowing what animals got exposed to a sick animal, and it should expedite getting back to the farm of origin. Then the other benefit is that, if they're scanned with a wand, you're not going to be transposing digits in a number like you can if you're visually reading the tag and shouting out that number to someone who has to write it down on a piece of paper. So you hopefully have fewer transcription errors and more accurate identification to get a good solid trace.
Okay, so continuing on kind of the traceability side, one of the things that has been one of the, I'll just say, hot topics regarding this rule being implemented is the idea of data privacy. And I kind of mentioned what ICA's stance and thoughts are on that at the beginning. But can you talk about who has access to these databases beyond federal or state? Is there anybody else that has data access? And how does the state use the databases and or federal government?
Well, the database is accessed by regulatory officials, state or federal, and it's used in disease traceability. So that's the purpose of it. So it's not something that's, available to the general public to access. I don't know what else I can tell you beyond that, I guess.
I can add to that just a little bit. And it's only certain staff that actually work within disease traceability that have access to it. So it's not everybody within IDOLS or everybody within USDA. It's very limited. It has to be specific to their role to have access to that. The other thing I should add, and I should have said this when we were talking about premise IDs, but under Iowa law, we can keep premise IDs and all that information that's associated with those premise IDs privileged and confidential. So if there is an open records request, we don't have to release that information because there's a law that's on the books that says that that is information that is not subject to those types of requests. So if there was one, we would not be releasing that information.
I appreciate that point, Dr. Rumsey. Because I obviously is something from an association standpoint that we get concerned about is, those public records requests or with a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act. And I did reach out just to get some clarification on what precedence is out there for protecting that data from those FOIA requests. And I'll just share just a little bit of what I received. There was a case in 2015 with the American Farm Bureau Federation versus the EPA. And that was Farm Bureau and the Pork Producers Council had a favorable decision in the Eighth Circuit, arguing that the EPA disclosed personal information dealing with CAFO's ownership and owners in violation of an existing FOIA exemption. So we have some precedents of some things that have been in place out there, where they can retract some of that information. And if there is a situation, which I don't think there would be in these cases, there's a lot of information would be retracted out of any of the documents to protect individual identification specifically, leading to the point that Dr. Rumsey made as well. And I'm sure there's some additional things on a federal level, potentially with the Privacy Act, protecting personal information, some exemptions I'm sure out there, just like the one specific to Iowa, which is good to know that that's in place.
And one other thing to add is that in a disease outbreak, we will not identify individual premises that are affected by a disease. It's only identified on a county level. That's something with the 2015 highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak and then the current one that's going on. We get requests all the time. People want to know exactly where everything is at, and we will not do that. It's only on the county level.
Okay. So I actually think we've gotten through all of our questions. Morgan's telling me that that's all of them that we have. I apologize. One other one that's one that we probably should touch base on just quickly. If individuals want to purchase the readers or any of those things that are specific to these tags, those are not available through IDLES, are they, Dr. Rumsey?
I'm going to double check with Dr. Kaizian on that one.
Okay. Yeah, that's just kind of a clarification. I know you have the tags, but I didn't just want to clarify. I didn't know the answer, so I thought maybe sorry to put you on the spot on that one. We do have one more come in. And I probably both of you may be able to answer this question. When you have a tag that comes in that you have a tag that is found to be linked to some type of a traceability issue that you've got to work on, does that existing owner have access to any prior or previous owner's information? So I'm going to guess that it was an animal that was purchased and then is found to have disease in some cases and then needs to be traced back. Is there any connection made back to producers knowing who is responsible? I guess you could say. I don't want to use that word specifically, but I'm just trying to help phrase the question. Did that make sense?
I think I understand what you're getting at, and we do not provide that traceability information to producers. So if someone somehow had a sick animal identified and was trying to find out where that animal originated based on its ear tag, we would not provide that information to the producer. It's only used by state or regulatory officials for what we call program diseases. That's the diseases where we have a state, federal, cooperative disease control or eradication program, or say a foreign animal disease investigation. But we don't provide that detail of information to producers or to anyone else.
Okay, one additional question came in about how do you handle a lost tag? I know you talked about that. If there are some specific cases like infection or malfunction of the tag, and it has to be replaced, or if it's just lost, what's the steps or process in order to do that?
Right. So they contact the state veterinarian or my office. We give the producer permission to replace the tag. If they know the tag that was lost, they record that in their records and they record the new tag number, which as of November 5th would be an EID tag. And then they keep those records for 5 years. One specific scenario, though, that I haven't addressed is if that animal happened to be a Canadian imported animal and it lost its Canadian RFID tag. In that case, we do not want to retag that animal with an 840 tag because that would signify that the animal was born in the US. So they've developed a special tag that has the letters IMP for import stamped on it. And you can get those tags from IDLES. USDA has provided each of the states some of those tags for that specific situation where an imported animal loses its tag.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think
I've got one more thing. I did get some clarification on the EID tags that IDOLS form. Actually, producers and veterinarians can both request tags from IDOLS for those free tags. So I just wanted to make sure that I provided that clarification for everybody.
right. And I think Dr. Rumsey, I think you mentioned earlier too that when you do request those tags, Iowa is given an allotment and get what you need to fulfill the rule. So there are other tags available for others as well. I think you mentioned that previously. So just want to point that out as well.
Correct.
As we wrap up today, I just want to do a couple. First off, we will, this webinar was recorded. We will post it on our ICA in our member page. So it'll be live within the member page. So you'll have your member login and you could go back and re-listen to it or watch it. I do want to take time to thank Dr. Petersburg for doing the presentation today and answering the questions. I know that he's done a few of these as well, and you never know what types of questions you're going to get. So I know it is a little bit hard to prepare, and even though we were trying to prepare and give some ideas of what questions might come up, you never know, and I appreciate the opportunity to have him on. As well as Dr. Rumsey, thank you for filling in today for Dr. Kaizen. We appreciate that partnership that is provided through IDOLS. We've had Dr. Kaizen to some of our ICA board meetings, and I appreciate the openness and being able to reach out and to have conversations as things come up with your office as well. So thank you very much. In conclusion today, I do want to point out just real quickly, one of the things that we're doing at the association is trying to share a little bit of the impact we're making on the cattle industry. You'll see there's a QR code down at the bottom right-hand corner on your screen. If you can scan that, that'll take you to an ICA impact report that we're going to be posting and putting out. You can see some of the activities and things that we've done, as well as the successes and how we're working on behalf of our members on a regular basis. You have emails there. If you have additional questions, please feel free to send those to us. We'll try to get those answered. And I hope today was informative. I know that there are going to be some changes that some individuals will need to be making and thinking about. So as part of our role to make sure that our members have the education and the information they need to operate correctly and to be compliant with the rule as it stands and will go into effect on November 5th. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Dr. Petersburg and Dr. Rumsey. And I hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.